Now we're going to add additional detail for the storefront shutter, and the built-in corner shutter window. Throughout this entire detailing modeling process, I will be looking at reference, all the photo reference I collected. So when we model in these details, I want you to be aware that I am looking at photo reference off to the side on the second screen. And I won't be popping them into view because that would get very distracting. So the important thing I want you to take away is anytime you work on your project, anytime you model, you should be paying attention and looking at photo reference you collected. This way everything you create is not based out of imagination, but it has basis in real world and real world architecture. So let's get started. We're going to save this with a new file name. Let's go to File, Save Scene As, and give the number 02. I like to save iterations as we move along with this project, just in case I need to go back to an early version if I mess anything up. We're going to begin with the front store shutter, this area right here. I'm going to delete history, and let's insert 2 edge loops. These 2 edge loops will define the extra detail on the front for where the track for the door will be. So all we need is 2 edges on each side to extrude that detail. Let's select the edges we don't need and remove them. So all we have left are 2 edges on each side. Let's go to side or front view, and I cannot see the edges. That is because we are viewing from the back instead of from the front. So to do this, we need to go to view, view along axes, and switch to X. You may need to switch to -X or even Z. This will depend on the axis that you view in this viewport in, or you may not even need to do this. To easily tell which viewing axis you need to switch to, take a look at the bottom left corner. This will tell you which axis you need to switch to. So I'm gonna snap these edges to the grid so they are identically positioned, and then I'm gonna scale them in just a little bit. Let's switch over to perspective view, select the 2 faces on each side, hold Shift, and drag to extrude. We don't want to extrude too much, just enough to give that a little extra detail for the shutter door. Now I'm bringing back the template and the scale and just taking a look how it looks in comparison to the human reference scale. And I think that's pretty good size. Now let's focus on the shutter door storage. This is where the shutter door would be stored if it's rolled up and open. Select the 2 faces and extrude using the template as our guide. Gonna extrude again and then scale the faces in just a bit. This creates a bit more interesting geometry, and again I'm looking at various photo reference for the garage shutter door storage, and this looks good. Now let's add a bit more detail right above this shutter storage. For this we need a couple of faces. So instead of inserting an entire edge loop that will wrap around the building, switch over to edge component mode, and we're going to select these 3 edges, hold down Shift, right click, hold, and choose Connect Components. This will insert an edge between these 3 selected edges. Let's drag these 2 edges down, select the faces, and extrude them to create that extra detail. Then we want to delete the 2 faces which were extruded but we will not see. I like to do this right away because I may forget if I wait till the cleanup stage. So this may require you to go to wireframe mode to select those faces. Now let's select these 2 edges and drag them down to create a slight angle in geometry. Now as I'm looking at this, I think the 2 borders that we extruded earlier on each side could be a bit thicker. So I'm basing this off of looking at the viewport and looking at surrounding geometry and feeling that this little extra detail just needs to be a bit wider. So I'm going to go in the front view and select the inner vertices of those 2 borders, making sure that I deselect everything else. And in perspective viewport, you could move what you have selected just to check that you have nothing else selected that you don't want. Then press Z to undo. And now with these vertices selected, I'm going to scale them in slightly to increase the thickness of that detail. So be prepared to make constant and slight adjustments as you model in your detail. This becomes more of an ongoing process throughout the entire modeling of your object. There are 2 things we want to enable that will help us model this better. and that is border edges and backface column. So go to display, polygons, and on the very bottom you will see custom polygon display. Let's go ahead, open that up. We want to affect all objects and then enable border edges and turn on backface column. Backface column will hide the display of back faces so we don't see them, which are not rendered in game. So this helps with our modeling, and it also helps us see if there's a face that's facing the wrong direction. And border edges shows us which border does not have a connected polygon to it. Now let's focus on the storefront. We're going to remove these three faces and snap these vertices, moving them closer to the front, to these vertices. I want the angle to start right at this edge instead of having that extra corner that we had before. And I'm basing this decision on some of the photo reference I'm seeing. I'm going to select these overlapping vertices, shift, right click hold, and merge them. I'm going to do it for all the vertices that I snapped. Next, let's select these four edges and delete them. We need these three faces to be angled and flat. We're going to add an edge here on the bottom for the extra border we're going to have. So I'm going to select two edges, shift, right click hold, go to connect components, then drag the edge down to be about 20 units from the ground. And then select these two faces, press Ctrl E to extrude, and I'm going to set thickness to minus 2.5. This creates nice extruded in geometry. Let's take a look. Now we need to delete these two faces that were created during the extrusion right here on the side. Select them and delete. And I'm actually going to delete these other faces on this side. So select them all and hit delete. And we'll rework this entire area a little later. Now select the single edge for the bottom border and pull it down to create slight angle in geometry. This looks better than having 90-degree angles. We're not going to do this to every border or to every right 90-degree angle edge, but just in certain areas. Next, I'm going to select this middle face and press Ctrl E. We're going to offset this 5 units to create exterior borders, so then we'll be able to extrude that face in and have that extra bit of geometry. This section will have steel bars in the front, but behind it won't be a window. It might have been a window at some point, but it has been since replaced for more secure option. Gonna give the building and the storefront less chance of a break-in. So we're telling some history and giving some context to this building through our geometry and through how we're going to texture. So after we offset the face to create that exterior border, I pressed Ctrl E again to extrude that face in at minus 7.5 on local translate Z. I usually use thickness, but in this case, local translate Z extrusion works similar. And this creates that indent where we'll be able to have the steel bars in the front. And now we have some nice additional detail for that storefront. Let's take care of the side. For this, I'm simply going to select edges, hold Shift and extrude them. Then snap the vertices to the nearby vertice for the door and snap them to the grid. I'm going to do this for all the edges. Again, select the edge, hold Shift, left click drag to extrude, then snap the vertices or the edge to the grid, aligning with the nearby geometry. We will optimize this section and this model later, but we do want to merge overlapping vertices. So switch over to vertex component mode, select the overlapping vertices, hold Shift, right click hold, and choose merge vertices. We're going to do this for all the overlapping vertices where we extruded the edges to. You can use a shortcut, G, to repeat last used command, so you don't have to go up to the menu. And you can see how our border edges help telling us where we need to merge overlapping vertices. They are shown by that thick border, and once we merge vertices, it goes to the regular thin edge display. So make sure you go through all overlapping vertices and merge them. And here is what we have so far. Let's come back to the front shutter door and make a slight adjustment. I want to make this door and the shutter door holder slightly wider. I think it's a bit too narrow. So I'm going to select the vertices on each side and move them over to make the shutter area wider. Once you've spent some time away working on another area, away from a certain section, when you come back to it, you'll notice a few things you might want to update and adjust. So it's good to spend time working one section at a time, then move somewhere else, and then come back and see if you still like it and if you need to make adjustments. And you'll often find that you do want to make a few changes. Well, let's continue to the corner of the building. We're going to define an area where the shutter window is going to go. So we're going to select these 6 faces, and we need an auto border for them. So I'm going to press Ctrl E and offset with a value of 10. And I think 10 is too much, so I'm going to change it down to 8. Then let's extrude these inner faces in with thickness of -5. We will have right in front a window shutter that's going to go across, so we won't see what's behind it. But we are defining where a window will go if there is no shutter. And we're going to need a border at the top and the bottom for something to hold the shutter in place, so the shutter could slide across to open and close. Now we need to make a slight adjustment to the faces that we want to extrude, these top and bottom faces. Right now, they have an angle on each side, and we want them to be extruded straight. So for this, we need to insert an edge. We're going to use multi-cut tool, go to mesh tools, multi-cut, and right now we're just going to insert an edge at each corner. Once we have them all inserted, we need to align them. Let's switch our grid spacing to 1. This will make it easier to adjust and align to the grid. And then just go through in side view or front view and make sure that these edges are straight by snapping them to the grid. Now let's select the bottom and the top faces for where the border is going to be extruded from. Press Ctrl E and set thickness to 8. These borders is where we're going to create our window shutter, which will be held in place by these borders. Let's take a look. This looks pretty good. And now let's switch our grid back to 10. Let's do one more thing, and that is to remove faces that we're not going to see. We already did that with the very top above shutter storage, but we did not delete faces for the very first shutter door extrusions on each side. So let's switch over to face component mode, and I'm going to go to the top and the bottom and just remove these faces. Delete history, and let's export this to test inside Unreal Engine 4. I'm going to select everything. You can go to File, Export Selection, but I have Export Selection on my custom tool shelf. I'm going to overwrite the existing file name, the FBX file, keeping all the options we set previously the same. And inside Unreal Engine 4, right-click inside the content browser on the static mesh and choose Reimport. I think this looks pretty good. Press Alt-5 or Alt-6 to go into lighting or detail lighting only mode. And as you can see, we did not have to add a lot of geometry to make this detail look good. Just simple extrusions, and once we have our final textures, final material, and lighting, this detail is all we need to make the object look good. So don't think you have to add a lot of geometry to your detail. Keeping things simple will go a long way, especially for low poly objects. Now let's make sure we go to File and Save All.